everybody. Thank you so much for joining the Unruly Hour with Savage Joy. Tonight, I have the independent candidate for president, Sir Mark Charles, joining us. And what beautiful timing, since the establishment is having their convention today. So it's perfect timing. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you this evening.
Thank you. So looking into your platform and your history and everything, I totally see why you decided to run. You are an activist, which makes the best candidates. Can you explain what your deciding factor was in taking such a huge step and running for president of the United States?
Yeah, before I go there, let me just introduce myself very quickly. So, Yate, Mark Charles Eunice, yeah. Simba Kedina Nishla, the Tohiguni Bashichin, Simba Kedina Dashichedo to the Chini Dashinella. In our Navajo culture, when we introduce ourselves, we always give our four clans. We're matrilineal as a people, and our identities come from our mother's mother. My mother's mother is American of Dutch heritage, and that's why I say Simba Kedina. Translated loosely, that means I'm from the wooden shoe people. My second clan, my father's mother, is Tohiguni, which is the waters that flow together. My third clan, my mother's father, is also Tsimbekedina. My fourth clan, my father's father, is Puruchini, and that's the Bitterwater clan. It's one of the original clans of our Navajo people. I also just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you today from what's now known as Washington, D.C., which is the land of the Piscataway. The Piscataway are the nation that lived here. They hunted here, they farmed here, they fished here. Their lives were here long before Columbus got lost at sea. They are the indigenous hosts of these lands. And I like to acknowledge the host people of the land no matter where I go around the country. And so I am grateful for the stewardship this Piscataway have had of these lands for hundreds, even thousands of years. And it's an honor to be living on their lands that they have here. So I wanted to say Kahat to the Piscataway people and honor them for the stewardship of these lands. I announced my presidency, my campaign for presidency last May. It was the end of May 2019. And it had been a fairly long journey for me. I published a book. I had a book that came out about last November, so about 7 or 8 months ago. It's titled Unsettling Truth, the Ongoing Dehumanizing Legacy of the Doctrine of Discovery. I had been living on the Navajo Nation, and I had been experiencing the marginalization of our Native peoples, and had been studying about and learning about the doctrine of discovery. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's a series of papal bulls written in the 1400s. It's essentially the church in Europe saying to the nations of Europe, wherever you go, whatever lands you find not ruled by white European Christian rulers, those people are subhuman and their land is yours for the taking. So this is the doctrine that the European nations go into Africa, colonize the continent, and enslave the people. It also is what allowed Columbus to discover America. You can't discover lands already inhabited. You can steal those lands, you can conquer those lands, you can colonize those lands. You can't discover them unless you don't believe the people who are there are human. So the fact that we refer to Columbus as the discoverer of America reveals the bias, which is that Native peoples aren't human. So that bias and that doctrine of discovery gets embedded into the foundations of our nation. It becomes a part of our Declaration of Independence that refers to natives as savages. 30 lines after the phrase "all men are created equal," it gets embedded into our Constitution, which excludes natives and counts Africans as 3/5 of a person, and it gets embedded into our Supreme Court case law as recently as 2005, with the United States Supreme Court referencing the doctrine of discovery as the legal precedent for land titles. So the challenge is that as a nation, we the people has never meant all the people. It's never was meant to include everybody. Tonight is the first night of the Democratic National Convention, and it was 4 years ago. It was 4.5 years ago. It was in President Obama's last State of the Union. And he was, in his State of the Union, he was reflecting on, talking about the divisiveness of our nation and that he had experienced as president, as our nation's first African-American president. And in his speech, he was talking about the need in our country to have a new politics. and he quoted the Constitution. He said, "We the people." Our Constitution begins with these three simple words, words that we've come to recognize mean all of the people. Now that sounds beautiful, and he got a lot of applause for that line. But I heard him say that, and I said, when? When did we decide this? The founding fathers had no intention of including women or natives or African Americans as a part of their union. Abraham Lincoln, who was a blatant white supremacist and ethnically cleansed the states of Minnesota, Colorado, and New Mexico to make the way for the Transcontinental Railway, did not believe we the people meant all the people. The civil rights movement didn't get us to we the people meaning all the people. Problem is we've never decided as a nation that we want our country to be a place where we the people includes everybody. And my campaign is essentially calling the question. I'm asking Americans all around the country, do you want to live in a nation where we the people includes everybody? If you do, then we have to deal with our foundation. We have to wrestle with what our doctrine of our Declaration of Independence says, with what our Constitution says, and with what our Supreme Court case law is based on. And that's what my campaign is about. It's calling the question, asking people, do you want to make foundational level changes so that really for the very first time, we the people might actually include everybody.
Absolutely. One of the really fascinating things you said in your extended announcement video was you talked about the 13th Amendment, and you had a different take on it. And it's a way, frankly, I never really considered, but it makes so much sense. Can you kind of expand on that a little?
Yeah, so the challenge is as a nation, we have one of the highest incarceration rates of any country in the world. And we have the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. And we incarcerate people of color at 3 to 5 times the rate that we incarcerate white people. Since the murder of George Floyd by the Minneapolis Police Department, and even before that, as there were many other killings very similar, we have had a very robust debate about reforming our criminal justice system. We've had a very robust debate about institutionalized white supremacy and constitutionally protected racism. And a lot of people, in this debate, Donald Trump was arguing that maybe we should ban certain chokeholds. Joe Biden suggested we should shoot people in the kneecaps instead of in the chest. And I've been advocating that if we really want to deal with this institutionalized white supremacy, we have to deal with our 13th Amendment. See, most people believe that the 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. What it actually says is neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, where the party has been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. Sorry. Sorry about that. Got something in my throat there. And so the problem is we've never abolished slavery. The 13th Amendment doesn't abolish it. It redefines and codifies it under the jurisdiction of our criminal justice system. And so if we really want to deal with our mass incarceration rate, if we really want to deal with our institutionalized white supremacy, if we really want to reform our criminal justice system and get rid of this school to prison pipeline that we have to start by first abolishing slavery, because that's where our white supremacy is institutionally protected. That's where we keep this racism protected by the Constitution. And that really is a part of Abraham Lincoln's legacy. If you read the Lincoln-Douglas debates, Abraham Lincoln and Judge Douglas, in their debates when he was running for Senate, absolutely believed, they both agreed on white supremacy. They disagreed on slavery. Abraham Lincoln felt like we could keep white supremacy intact without the apparent practice of chattel slavery. And Judge Douglas felt very strongly that we needed slavery to keep white supremacy intact. Abraham Lincoln, in his inauguration address, actually endorsed what's called the Corwin Amendment, which would have been the 13th Amendment. It was passed by the Senate the morning of his inauguration. And what it did is it constitutionally protected slavery in states where it already existed. Even if you read the quote of Abraham Lincoln at the Lincoln Memorial, there's a quote that he gave that says, "My primary object in this struggle is not to save or destroy slavery, is to preserve the Union. If I could save the Union without freeing a single slave, I would do it. And if I could preserve the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could preserve the Union by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." There's a quote hanging at the Lincoln Memorial that literally states, according to Abraham Lincoln, black lives don't matter. He was a blatant white supremacist, and he had no value for black lives. He was trying to preserve the Union, and he absolutely believed that that black African Americans, people of color, were not going to be citizens. They were not going to be jurors or judges or have the right to vote or to intermarry. He wanted to end slavery, but he had no desire to end white supremacy. And so his 13th Amendment, which was the crown, the capstone of his career, actually achieved his goal, which was he had freed the slaves, but now he was keeping this institution of slavery protected under the Constitution, and it kept it legal. And so it was President Lincoln, or President Reagan and Clinton, who really perfected the art of mass incarceration. And under their terms in office, the incarceration rate of people of color just skyrocketed. And so this is where we find we are today, where we have this institutionalized, constitutionally protected practice of slavery in our criminal justice system. And if we really want to reform our criminal justice system, we have to start by abolishing slavery, which no one else really wants to talk about right now.
Absolutely. And do you fear that if Joe Biden wins, and I definitely mean if, that people are going to start leaving the streets, that people are just going to say, oh, we're going back to normal, and be like, oh, so he won, it's all good?
The challenge I fear with Joe Biden is the same challenge I felt with Hillary Clinton in 2016. And it's the same situation. In 2016, we had Donald Trump running to make America great again. Hillary Clinton responded by saying America's great already. They both agreed our past, our history, our foundations were great. They disagreed if we were great in 2016. Donald said no, Hillary said yes. See, we were duped. We thought that the 2016 election was about racism versus anti-racism, or equality versus inequality. It wasn't. What we were debating was, do we want Donald Trump to make us explicitly white supremacist, racist, and sexist? Or do we want Hillary Clinton to work to keep our racism and white supremacy implicit? And we voted for implicit, and the Electoral College gave us explicit. So now in 2020, we have Donald Trump running against Joe Biden. Joe Biden, who came out of the Democratic primary, he was the least inspiring of all the candidates. Over a year ago, we had one of the most diverse field of candidates our nation has ever seen running for president within the Democratic Party. More women, more people of color, more members from the LGBTQIA2S plus community. And out of that, the Democratic Party selected Joe Biden, who by his own wife's admission was not the best on most issues, but still felt he was entitled to this position. And so the challenge we have is, in this whole policing debate we've had right now, and we've had a really good debate in the past few months about things such as Confederate monuments and Confederate statues and what should we do with those. And Donald Trump feels very strongly that we should probably keep all the Confederate statues in place where they are. Joe Biden thinks they should probably belong in a museum. They both agree we shouldn't touch the legacies of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, who both owned enslaved people, but yet they're heroes of our nation. I'm sure they would both agree we shouldn't remove the Lincoln Memorial, who was, as I just described, he was a blatant white supremacist who actually committed genocide against Native peoples. And so while Joe Biden may be not as rough around or as crass around the edges as Donald Trump is, they both actually have the same core values. I gave a TED talk probably about 2.5 years ago. It was titled "Lead the People: The Three Most Misunderstood Words in U.S. History." And in it, I go through 2 Supreme Court cases, which reference the doctrine of discovery as the legal precedent for land titles. It was in 1823 that John Marshall there was a case between the Supreme Court, Johnson versus McIntosh. It was 2 white men of European descent litigating over a single piece of land. One bought the land from a native tribe, the other one got the same land from the government. They wanted to know who owned it. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the court had to decide who had the right to sell the land, the tribe or the government. They ruled that discovery is what gave title to the land. And then they referenced the doctrine of discovery and said that because natives are savages, we only are occupants of the land. While Europeans, who are fully human, they have the fee title to the land, right of discovery to the land, so therefore they're the true title holders. That case created the legal precedent for land titles based on this dehumanizing doctrine of discovery, and that got referenced by the Supreme Court in 2005. In my TEDx talk, I went through the 2005 case very in depth. I won't go into it in so much depth here, but it basically made the same argument that John Marshall made back in 1823, arguing that basically because natives are savages and our lands have now had white settlement and they've been converted from wilderness into cities like the city of Charlotte, New York, that natives have no sovereignty, no rights over our land. And the most striking thing about that is that opinion, written in 2005, was written by Ruth Bader Ginsburg. It's literally one of the most white supremacist Supreme Court opinions written in my lifetime. And it was written by the progressive voice of dissent on a very conservative-leaning Supreme Court. Why? Well, because when your land titles are based on the legal understanding that natives are savages, this makes white supremacy a bipartisan value. And the goal of the two-party system is to maintain the status quo. So neither party is interested in disrupting that system. And so both parties are going to put forth their candidates that are going to help maintain that status quo. And Joe Biden is very much an established status quo type of candidate. He is not interested in any sort of deep or systemic change. He wants to bring things back to normal. Again, he's talking about let's reclaim the soul of America, right? Well, only white people can say that, correct? If we want to go back to some point in history where things were better, only white people can look on the history of America with nostalgia. It was only 40, 50 years ago that African Americans could barely even sit in the same restaurant as white people. It was only 70 years ago that Native Americans were given the right to vote. It was only 3 decades ago that they closed the boarding schools for Native peoples. So to talk about our history with nostalgia is something that primarily really only white landowning men can do. And that's very much what Joe Biden is trying to do. Let's get back to the soul of America. Well, for many, many people, the soul of America meant enslavement and genocide. And so it helps you understand what perception, what context Joe is talking about and is running his campaign from.
Do you, as an independent, as 43% of us are, do you kind of wish that you could join in the debates?
Very much so. I was at 2 forums with the Democratic candidates last year. There were 2 Native American forums, one in August and one in January. And I was at both of those forums. I was on the same stage as Bernie Sanders, as Elizabeth Warren, as Kamala Harris, as Julian Castro, most of the major Democratic candidates. And there was actually an article written about the Franklin Air Forum by Esquire. And the title of the article was, Elizabeth Warren was well received at the Native American Forum, but Mark Charles was the main event. I absolutely at that forum demonstrated a very high level of expertise in the issues that were brought forward. I more than held my own, if not even stood above the other candidates who were there. And yet I get almost no press. The two-party system is very much supported by the media and by national news outlets. And they have literally written my campaign out of events that we've attended. And they refused to correct their stories, even when we reached out directly to them and told them they were not printing accurate stories. And they just said, well, we're not going to change anything. So yeah, it's been a very fascinating journey where the media has literally written us out of events. They haven't included us in the message, in the stories about the campaign. And it's all because they are just as interested in keeping the status quo as the two parties are. And so I would love to be on the same debate stage as Donald Trump. I would love to be on the same debate stage as Joe Biden. You know, when you look at my campaign right now with President Trump, he is one of the most divisive candidates the Republicans have put forward in decades, if not even longer. And Joe Biden is one of the least inspiring candidates the Democrats could have possibly picked out of their entire lineup of candidates from a year ago. And, you know, both of them are two white landowning men from the 1%, who the two parties are putting forward as they will have the solution and the leadership for our nation during not only this pandemic, but this incredible racial strife that we're going through right now. And it's really one of the things that we hear back a lot from people about our campaign is, you mentioned earlier, we have this 9-minute announcement video that we released 15 months ago. And it goes in depth into my vision of creating common memory, of wrestling with our history, of dealing with the doctrine of discovery, of calling for truth and conciliation. And I literally, on a weekly basis, get people emailing me, sometimes telling me they're in tears. They said, I feel so hopeless in this current political climate. And I just watched your announcement video and it brought me to tears because it offers so much vision and so much call for unity within our country. There's one of the quotes I use frequently. There's this great quote by George Erastus, who's a Dene leader from one of the tribes of Canada. And he says, where common memory is lacking, where people do not share in the same past, there can be no real community. If you want to build community, he says you have to start by creating common memory. This is really what I'm trying to do with my campaign. I'm not trying to oppress anyone. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I'm trying to get our nation to talk about our history, to create common memory, so that we can actually have a healthier community moving forward. To do that, we have to learn to acknowledge where we are and where we came from and what we've done. And our nation has never been able to do that. And that's really my vision of my campaign. That's one of the things I'm trying very hard to do, is create this common memory, find a way to talk about our past so that we can actually move forward in a healthier manner than we ever have before.
I think as one of many white people who followed Standing Rock so just intently, I think it was such a rude awakening for so many of us to really learn and witness just how bad things got. And when you see someone like Elizabeth Warren, who has claimed she's been Native for so long, and then she blatantly ignored Standing Rock and other things, what was, being a dual citizen of U.S. and Navajo Nation, what was your response to that?
Well, there was a lot of hard feelings with a lot of the Native community from the way Elizabeth Warren presented herself. It was interesting at the Franklin Mare Forum. She actually gave a pretty sincere apology and acknowledged in front of that forum that she had not conducted herself properly, and apologized to the people. And that actually was very well received. I think our people can tend to be very forgiving, and that apology was well received. One of the things that I'm trying to really raise up about Standing Rock is, one of the issues at Standing Rock that was really at the forefront. Not only was it just trying to teach this colonial nation that water is life, you can't drink oil, you have to preserve the environment, but it was also raising the issue of how Native nations do not have sovereignty over their own land. And there was just a Supreme Court case that came out just a month and a half ago. It was McGirt versus the state of Oklahoma, where it was really raising the question of, is the whole eastern half of Oklahoma reservation land? Because the state of Oklahoma has been treating it as state land, not as reservation land, and trying cases according to that. And this case that was just came out of the Supreme Court about 6 weeks ago was really a victory in many ways for Native nations, because the state of Oklahoma was arguing, well, we've never treated it as a reservation. We've always treated it as state land. They said the courts pretty much called it state land, and there's been white settlement and cities that have grown up within these lands for so long, and it would just be easier to leave it all as state land than to reclassify it as reservation land. And the Supreme Court said, well, first of all, state of Oklahoma, you have no right to disestablish reservation land. Second, the courts have no right to disestablish reservation land. And third, just because white settlement has moved in, that does not disestablish the reservation that was set up in these treaties by the U.S. Congress. And so the Supreme Court reversed the decision of the lower courts and basically concluded that, yes, these reservation lands have not been disestablished, and therefore we need to move forward understanding these are reservation lands. In many ways, that was a win for the Creek Nation. That was a win for McGirt. It overturned the lower court's decision. But peppered throughout that entire opinion written by Brett Kavanaugh, the court repeated itself and said over and over that any time the U.S. Congress can muster the will, they can disestablish reservation lands and break treaties with Native nations, and there is no way to hold them accountable. I read the entire 42-page decision the day it came out. And I saw, yes, while this was a win for the Creek Nation in that case, it was the first time I've ever seen the Supreme Court acknowledge, because we all know the U.S. Congress, the U.S. government breaks treaties with Native nations left and right. Hundreds have been signed, almost all of them have been broken. Everyone knows that. That's not a surprise. This was the first time I heard the court actually state that the U.S. Congress has the right to break treaties with Native nations, and there's no one who's going to hold them accountable, not even the Supreme Court. So that was very disheartening, but that's really the world that we live in, where because of the doctrine of discovery, because of this dehumanizing understanding of Native peoples and who we are, the United States truly believes that they can break treaties. So a few years ago, in the Trump administration, they broke treaty with Iran, correct? There was a nuclear treaty that was signed under the Obama administration, and when President Trump came into office, he broke that treaty. Now, by breaking that treaty, what that means is not only are we out of the treaty, it means Iran is released from the terms of that treaty, and they can continue to do what they want with their nuclear testing. So you would think if there was a treaty, for example, that had the Creek Nation, had their lands on the East Coast in Georgia and in North Carolina and places like that, and there was a treaty that was signed that would remove them from those lands and put them in Oklahoma, you would think that if the United States government were to break that treaty, that would not just mean the reservation would be disestablished. It would essentially mean the lands back on the East Coast would be now opened up again for the Creek people, correct? Because that's the way a treaty would work. See, most people think treaties are only about Native nations and Native reservations. No, treaties don't just decide where Natives are allowed to have reservations. Treaty decides where white people are allowed to establish settlements. But the nation doesn't think about it that way. Why? because of the doctrine of discovery, because of this understanding that natives are only occupants of the land and Europeans have the true title to the land, and therefore all this land is theirs simply because they gazed over it. And so this is where we have these challenges that our nation hasn't even begun to wrestle with. Treaty is not just a native issue. It's an issue that affects every American who lives here. Treaty is what defines not only where natives can live, but where white settlement is allowed to happen, where this nation is allowed to set up cities and create states. This is all dependent upon treaties. And the fact that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the United States government can break treaty at any time with a native nation and there is no consequence for that is deeply, deeply troubling, as well as simply unjust.
Absolutely. I had a great conversation with your schedule. She is incredible. I adore her. We talked way longer than we probably should have. But one of the things we discussed was how there are so many missing and murdered Native women that just don't get attention. And, you know, it's heartbreaking because, you know, there's just so many, should you win the presidency, is there some kind of, you know, bill or something you would enact to bring more attention to these women and help get them some justice?
Yeah. So I wear my hair in my CA, my Navajo bun. I tie it with red yarn, if you can see this in the camera. One of the reasons I do that is it's the reminder, it's the color to remind me of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So this is a crisis that is going on within Indian country, where literally hundreds, thousands of Indigenous women and girls have been reported missing. They've been reported murdered by their families to law enforcement. And not only have these cases not been closed, in many instances, they've never even been opened. Frequently, the families are left to search for these women and girls themselves because law enforcement at a local, state, and federal level refuses to do anything. It's a crisis. At the Frank Lemire Native American Presidential Forum, they actually asked the candidates about the crisis. Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris. They asked almost all the candidates about this crisis. And most of the candidates, upon learning about this crisis, stated that they would enact some new law or some policy to protect this very vulnerable demographic. However, and I've stated this numerous times throughout my campaign, when your Declaration of Independence refers to natives as savages, and your Constitution never mentions women, you probably should not be surprised when your Indigenous women go missing or get murdered and society doesn't care. This is a prime example of what the problems we face because of our foundation. A new law isn't going to solve this problem. The problem is the basis of our laws, our Declaration of Independence and our Constitution. If we want to fix this problem, we have to fix our foundation. And this is exactly what my campaign is trying to do. One of the things we've done in the past few months is we've released my first 100 days in office plan. It's on our website. If you go to our blog, you can see it there. We have videos out about it too. About 40 years ago, I read through the Constitution, beginning to end, starting with the preamble down to the 27th Amendment. I had never done that, maybe since I was in school, grade school, or sometime you might have done it. But I read it as an adult. And as I read it, I was shocked. I was appalled to see that there are 51 gender-specific male pronouns littered all throughout the Constitution. 51 he, him, and his. Who can run for office, who can hold office, even who's protected by the Constitution. There's not a single female pronoun in the entire document. The 13th Amendment keeps slavery legal in prison. Article 1, Section 2, it never mentions, this is the article that determines who is and who is not protected by the Constitution, who is we the people, essentially. It never mentions women, specifically excludes natives, counts Africans as 3/5 of a person. As you read through the Constitution, it is littered with racist, sexist, and white supremacist language. It was so bad as I was reading it, I actually put it onto my computer, copied the text, and I started going through it with a strike-through font. I wasn't changing balance of powers. I wasn't changing checks and balances. I was just removing the racist, sexist, and white supremacist language. That constitution, that version, that draft of an edited constitution is now on our campaign website. And it is my 100-day plan. After my inauguration, I intend to present that draft of the Constitution to the United States Senate and ask Mitch McConnell to pass it as an amendment for the Constitution. And then I want to see it ratified by the states. I think within 100 days, we can actually remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacism from our foundation. Now, is this going to change things overnight? No. But what it's going to do is going to give us foundations that actually state everybody is included. That actually state clearly that women, African Americans, Native Americans, people who are specifically excluded from the Constitution are now included. And then we'll get rid of so much of the implicit bias that exists within the Constitution. This is what's going to allow us to actually begin to make the decisions we have to make. One of the things I've said to Bernie Sanders supporters, and there's a lot of his supporters out there, and they're fighting very hard for Medicare for all right now. I absolutely believe that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. But one of the things I've said to them, to Bernie Sanders supporters, is that let's say Bernie Sanders hadn't suspended his campaign. Let's say he actually was able to win the nomination and he was actually able to get elected president. And once he got into office, he was able to drive Medicare for all down the throats of the Republicans. Let's just say that in a year from now, we actually had Medicare for all as a law of the land. But we hadn't removed the racism, the sexism, or the white supremacy from our foundation. What we would have is we would have a nation that offered great health care for white men. And everyone else would get a hodgepodge. Could you imagine what would happen to women's health care, especially women's reproductive health, right? If it was entirely funded by the government, and what would happen when different administrations came in, some for that type of health and others against it? It would be a crapshoot every 4 years. What's going to happen to women's reproductive health care? This is where I said, yeah, this is not a bad idea. Bernie doesn't convince me he knows how to pay for it. I don't think taxing billionaires is the best way to deal with systemic economic inequality, but because it still requires that you have billionaires. But what I do think is that if we really want to have healthcare be a right, not a privilege, we have to first remove the racism, the sexism, and white supremacy from the foundations so that whatever law we end up writing will actually be applied equally and equitably for all citizens. And right now, we don't have that.
Excellent point. I'm going to digress a bit and move to the Green New Deal and environmental issues. I know it's a very broad topic, but let's say you get into office, what are the first things you're going to focus on as far as environmentally?
Yeah, so the big challenge we have right now with the environmental crisis that is happening at the moment is both the Democrats and the Republicans are centering the economy. So as little as 6 months ago, President Trump was bragging that he had built the greatest economy our nation's ever seen. And he's done it with complete disregard for the environment, right? He lowered protection for the environment. He was drilling and doing everything else. And he built this, what he said was a very strong economy. Well, that's easy to do, right? If you exploit the environment, you exploit nature, you exploit people, you absolutely can build a very strong economy. We saw it was not as good as he thought it was. It crashed down in about 5 days and had huge problems with it. But he was centering the economy while exploiting the environment. The Democrats, with their Green New Deal, are arguing that we can have a great economy while we protect the environment. So they are still trying to center the economy. There's a documentary out there, it's called Homeland. It's a story documentary about different native nations trying to protect their traditional land. And one of the profiles in that documentary is of the Athabascan people up near the Arctic Circle in Alaska and in Canada. And in their story, the leader of the Athabascan people is talking, he's sharing about their creation story. And in the Athabascan creation story, he says that it's told that there is a piece of the caribou, they live along the migratory route of the caribou. And he said there's a piece of the caribou heart in the Athabascan and a piece of the Athabascan heart in the caribou, meaning there's a dependent relationship between the two for subsistence. And every year, he said, the caribou migrate north past their dwellings, and they go north to calf. And then in the fall, they go south to winter. And so they migrate past their camps twice a year. And he said every year, no matter how hard the winter was, no matter how hungry we are, even if we're in severe famine, he said we never hunt the caribou when they head north. If we did that, we might eat better for a year or two, but we would destroy this relationship with them, and we would actually break this cycle, and soon they would go extinct. So we never hunt the caribou when they head north. But we do hunt them freely when they go south because we need their fur to keep to make our clothes. We need their meat to keep us nourished, and we have a relationship with them. But we protect them when they head north, and we hunt them when they head south. Western civilization, you could say, have been hunting the caribou as they've headed north for the past 500, 600, maybe 700 years. And we're at a tipping point. The environment is at an absolute tipping point. And I cannot promise our nation that we can continue to prosper at levels we are accustomed to while we deal with the environmental crisis that we're facing. We have to actually decenter the economy so that we can focus on the environment. In 4 years or 8 years, when we actually get even closer and closer to the tipping point of this crisis, and if the Democrats have been promising for the nation that they can have a prosperous economy while they save the environment, right? If we look at our economy, just 5 months ago, we were coming off 11 years of a bull market. We had unprecedented, historic low unemployment rates. We had unprecedented corporate profits. The Trump administration was bragging about how great this economy was, and it literally came crashing down in 5 days. In 5 days, it came crashing down. You would have think if there was any point the U.S. economy would have been able to handle some kind of hiccup like a global pandemic, it would have been 6 months ago. And it crashed down in 5 days. This pandemic is going to be like child's play compared to the environment. So if we have the Democrats promising that we can still prosper while we save the environment, and we reach that tipping point and the thing comes crashing down, people are not going to be prepared to make the tough choices that need to be made. As president, I am not going to promise our nation that we can continue to prosper. The United States of America, we're 1/5 of the world's population. We consume 1/4 of the world's renewable resources. The American lifestyle is absolutely not sustainable. If the entire world consumed like the average American, our renewable resources would be gone by April of every year. So we have to prepare our people that if we're going to save this environment, we have to get rid of this understanding that we can continue living as we've been living. We have to prepare ourselves to make what will feel like some incredibly tough choices. What's both encouraging and disheartening is we've seen this global pandemic, which has ground economies to a screeching halt. And in the last 5 months, our carbon output has only been reduced by 17%, right? 17%. The goal is 50% by 2030. And even with the economies of the world grinding to a halt for 5 or 6 months, we only were able to shave off 17% of our carbon output. How much more painful is it going to get to be for us to get down to 50, let alone down to the carbon neutral point we want to get to? We have to prepare ourselves that we are facing a looming crisis. And I absolutely believe the American people can handle it, but they have to be prepared for it. They can't be told it's going to be okay. You know, this whole pandemic, the way we've been coping with this pandemic as a nation has been in 4 to 6 week chunks. We've been saying, oh, things will be back to normal in just a few weeks. Things will be back to normal in just a few weeks. So it's going to imagine just a few weeks. And it's both the Democrats and the Republicans. It was only 3 weeks ago that Joe Biden decided he wasn't going to accept the nomination in person, right? 3 weeks ago. He was still holding out that this thing was going to go away and he could still accept the nomination in person 3 weeks ago. What if we had, instead of coping with this pandemic in 4 to 6 week chunks, hoping it would somehow magically go away even before we got a vaccine, what if we begin planning last March and April to actually do online learning for an entire 12 months? How much headache could we have avoided? How much could we, of just the psychological wherewithal of the American people could have been stabilized because we've been preparing them for the long term, for a new normal for 12 to 18 months, instead of promising things will be back to normal in just a few weeks. People are incredibly resilient. We have incredible coping mechanisms. But we have to be told the truth. We have to be dealt with honestly. We have to be prepared. And so I'm afraid that what happened with the pandemic, where neither the Democrats nor the Republicans prepared us as a nation to make the changes we needed to make, the same thing's going to happen with the environment, because both of them are absolutely adamant we can continue to center the economy while we deal with the environment. And as president, I am going to say, no, we have to decenter the economy. We have to focus on the environment. We have to rethink our lifestyle. We have to absolutely curb our consumption as well as adopt green energy. And we're not going to be able to prosper. We cannot keep living the way we've been living for the past 250 years. The world cannot sustain the American lifestyle. And we have to tell that honestly to our citizens so that they can make the adjustments that need to be made so that we can all exist.
Absolutely. And as you know, speaking of the virus, right now we're witnessing, a lot of bullshit when it comes to trying to vote by mail. How trepidatious are you that it's, November is going to be just, lack of a better term, really jacked up?
I put this on my Facebook today. I forget exactly how I phrased it, but the United States Post Office, the United States Postal Service, it's not a commercial business. It's an independent government agency that provides an essential service of universal mail delivery for the entire country. And during this pandemic, we need that essential service properly funded. This is not about politics. This is about maintaining the integrity of our democracy. And if the Democrats just want to score political points and the Republicans want to prevent people from voting, then they have the wrong motivation. This is a government service, an essential government service needed during a global pandemic to protect the health of the American people and to make sure that we can practice our constitutional right of voting securely. We need to fully fund the U.S. Postal Service. Stop playing politics with it so that we can actually have a democracy that we can move forward with. I hate how this entire process has turned both our Democratic and Republican leaderships from Congress members and leaders into political pundits. They have these negotiations, and all they do at the end of the day is come out of these negotiations having made no progress, but very able to tell us that it's not their fault, it's someone else to blame. We actually need our leaders to lead. And so I'm concerned that both parties are trying to make sure they know who to blame when the thing falls apart, rather than actually trying to solve the problem. And I think it's one that can be solved, but we have to stop playing politics with it and actually just begin leading.
Absolutely. Also, as far as voting, a lot of states have do their best to try and keep independents, Greens, whoever from getting into the election, putting all kinds of obstacles. I did see that you filled out the paperwork a few days ago, and you are on the ballot in Vermont. And I just wonder, how many states are you on the ballot in?
So we are on the ballot in Vermont. We are on the ballot in Colorado. One of the commitments we've made as a campaign is we decided months ago that we're going to be completely online. We're going to do no in-person campaign. I absolutely believe that elections are essential. In-person public campaigning is not. And so we've decided that we are not going to do any in-person public campaigning, including signature collection. One of the ways, the primary way you get on the ballot in almost every state is through collecting signatures. And most states require that those signatures be collected in person. There's a few states that allow us to try and collect them remotely. We did that with not as much success as we had hoped. It's very difficult to engage local communities online. And so we are going to we're hoping that we will be able to be a write-in candidate in about 36 to 38 states, actually probably more like 36 states, and be on the ballot in hopefully 2 to 3 states. So we're hoping that in between, I think, 39 and 41 states, people will have the option to vote for us, which gives us more than enough. That gives us access to over 400 votes in the Electoral College, which is more than the 270 needed to win. You know, the biggest challenge I'm facing is that most people think the winner is only going to come from one of the two major parties. And they're very afraid about breaking outside of that two-party system. And so one of the things we're doing in our campaign is we're reminding people that, yeah, voting third party is a risk. It's going to feel risky. People are going to tell you it's a risk. It is absolutely a risk to vote third party. But if you want change, you're never going to get change without risk. The two-party system is all about maintaining the status quo. That's why the two-party system exists. That's why the Republicans are afraid of people actually voting, and the Democrats are afraid of other people running. So I get more grief from Democrats telling me to drop out of the race because they don't want Joe Biden to have any competition, much more than Republicans do. But it's really fascinating how neither party is very democratic at all. The Republicans are trying to prevent people from voting, and the Democrats are trying to prevent people from running. Neither party have a true value for democracy, and they just play it out in different ways. And so we are constantly reminding our supporters that, yeah, if you want the type of systemic change that we are advocating for in our campaign, the only way you're going to get that change is by actually writing a name in the ballot. The system is not going to allow it to be there for you to check. You're going to have to take the extra step of writing my name into the ballot if you want to actually abolish slavery, if you want to learn how as a nation we can honor treaties, and if you want to remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from the foundation. That change is not going to come from the status quo. It's not going to come through the system, and you're actually going to have to write the name in of the person who you want to help make that change.
Absolutely. So I do want to give you the option to give your website, your Twitter, your Facebook, all that fun stuff, and then any lasting thoughts that you want to leave our viewers.
Yeah, thank you. So our website is markcharles2020.com. On there, you can sign up to volunteer with us. We have policies we're putting up. We have links to the videos we've made. We have our announcement video that even to this day is probably one of our best campaign tools. It offers people so much hope and vision for what we want to do as an administration. And you can sign up to receive our email letters. You can don't make a donation to our campaign. It really is the center hub. You can link to all of our social media through our website. We've actually gotten a lot of really good compliments about our website. It's been well organized. We even have a store there. You can purchase Mark Charles t-shirts or face masks. And so there's a lot of things you can do there. You can also follow us on social media. We're very active on Facebook. We're active on Twitter. We're active on Instagram. We're active on YouTube. We even have a TikTok account. And so you can follow us on all of those social medias, and we try to engage really well with audiences there too. And I think one of the things I mostly just want to share with our people, our nation, is this vision that I have of building a nation where we the people truly means all the people. On one hand, it's something that most Americans assume we already have that. But there are many people, many marginalized groups of people, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, whether it's members of the LGBTQ community. There are many people who have the very lived and real experience of realizing that in some very real and practical ways, we the people was not meant to include them. And they live with that, they understand that, they know that. And we want to change that. You know, if you want to serve in the military, if you want to hold public office, if you want to be a judge, you have to stand up and take an oath to protect and defend our Constitution. Now, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're a member of LGBTQIA2S+, you have to take that oath hoping that the Constitution means something it doesn't actually say. And we want to change that. We want to remove the racism, the sexism, and the white supremacy from our Constitution. I tell people, you know, if you think the Constitution was meant to be inclusive, get on a Zoom call with African Americans, Native Americans, and women, and read the document out loud. You will be shocked and embarrassed to see how quickly the white supremacist, racist, and sexist language comes into play. And so our nation, we talk about there's this promise of America. I'm not certain that promise ever existed. I know the founding fathers did not mean to include all the people when they wrote these documents. But I think there's a dream, there's a vision, there's a hope within the human spirit of people who want to be included. They want to be part of something bigger. And I think our nation has the capacity to be that place. But first, we have to make the intentional decision that we want to be that place. We can't just wish it was true and make it happen. Because our Constitution was written to so specifically exclude certain groups of people, we now have to make the very intentional choice to now include those very same people. And so my campaign is calling the question. I'm traveling, I'm speaking around the nation electronically, online, asking people, do you want to live in a nation where we the people actually means all the people? If you do, then we have to work together on these foundations. And that's what I'm inviting the country to do. That's the vision I'm holding up. That's the promise, not the promise of America, but the promise, that hope that exists within the human spirit, that we can somehow be a better community and be more inclusive of those around us. And that's what I'm campaigning on.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody, please follow Mr. Charles. As you can see, he's incredible. Also, he does have a book, so check that out. Let me see what I have listed here. So coming up this week, I have, well, first let me shout out to my Patreon, Jim Murray. If you go to Patreon, you can subscribe to my show for as little as $3 a month. So you can help me, my streaming services, my equipment, things like that. Everything's appreciated. Tomorrow, Jen Perelman is on the ballot against Debbie Wasserman Michelle. We need to get her out. If you are in Florida, please vote for Jen. My book I wrote with Patrick is on sale. It is being printed at savagecat.com. You can get $2 off if you enter code Nina. Because Pat and I are going to be on Nina Turner's podcast on Thursday. I can't believe she asked us. It's kind of surreal, but yes, that's happening. I have Nick Fry from Movement for a People's Party and Mike Figueredo from Humanist Report on the 25th. So thank you guys again so much for watching, and thank you again, Mark. You are phenomenal, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you on the show, and I appreciate the chance to talk to you today.
Absolutely. Take care.
Take care.